Hello, everyone. I'm Sue, and I'm really excited to get into this today. We're tackling, well, a huge question, really fundamental for our tech future. Who actually owns artificial intelligence? It sounds simple, maybe, but it's got these enormous implications for, innovation, ethics, even the power structures shaping our digital world. It's moving so fast.
And I'm Bob. You've absolutely nailed it there. This isn't just some niche legal thing. It's about the very foundations of AI itself. So today we're going to try and explore this sprawling landscape of AI's intellectual property. Everything from the actual code, the algorithms, right through to the amazing stuff it creates. We'll look at who gets the credit, who's claiming ownership, and maybe who's getting left out. It's definitely a complex puzzle, but we're here to connect the dots for you.
That's right. So by the end of this investigation, you'll hopefully get a clearer picture of this global race to define AI ownership and understand why just taping a simple prompt into an AI tool could potentially lead to a legal fight, and how all the language, the data, the stuff we all contribute might actually be changing the power dynamics in AI. Get ready for some moments that might just make you think differently about the digital tools you interact with every single day. Okay, so let's dive in. First stop, what people are calling the AI gold rush. And the completely unprecedented IP challenges popping up alongside it. AI isn't just another piece of software, is it? It's projected to add something like $13 trillion to the global economy by 2030. That's staggering. And we saw investment in AI startups just explode, right? Over $40 billion back in 2018 alone. Now, this boom, it fuels this immense amount of AI-related intellectual property. Think about it. Over 27,000 AI patent applications in the US just since 2017. But here's where it gets really interesting. AI isn't just the product anymore. It's becoming a tool for creating other IP, like pharmaceutical companies using it for drug discovery, or advertisers using AI to generate content. The outputs are incredibly valuable. They represented, 84% of S&P 500 company value in 2018?
Exactly. And that immense value creates a huge problem, a real conundrum. Because our traditional IP frameworks, patents, copyright, all that stuff, they've served us well for decades, but they just weren't designed for things created by machines. Professor Lawrence Lessig at Harvard Law, he calls it a digital Wild West, doesn't he? Highlighting this ownership paradox. The speed and capability of AI is just throwing up new challenges almost daily. And you see organizations globally scrambling, WIPO, the EPO in Europe, the USPTO, the UK's IP office. They're all grappling with things like AI inventorship, patent eligibility, data rights, AI copyright. It's a massive undertaking.
So given all that, the really fundamental question we have to keep asking is, who owns the AI code base, the GPTs, the LLMs, the actual math underneath it all, and who owns the output? It's absolutely foundational. Right now, companies are using a mix of tools, patents, copyrights, trade secrets, contracts, trying to protect their AI-related IP. The core algorithms, for instance, they're often shielded by a blend of copyright, trade secrets, maybe some contract law. But these are old tools being stretched, really stretched, to fit something entirely new, and the clarity, it's just not always there, is it?
Precisely. Not at all. And that lack of clarity leads us straight into our next big area. The whole concept of authorship and ownership when it's a machine, not a person, generating the work. This is really where that core question, who owns AI-generated content, gets very, very real.
And the U.S., well, they've taken a pretty strict line so far, haven't they? The Copyright Office, the Patent and Trademark Office, they're firm. Inventors, authors, they have to be human. You literally cannot name an AI tool as the inventor on a patent. And lots of other places agree, UKIPO, EPO, PTO. It seems rooted in that idea of, incentivizing human creativity.
Yeah, that's the justification.
Yeah. And people might remember that graphic novel, Zarya of the Dawn. The images were made by AI. And the U.S. Copyright Office specifically said, okay, copyright applies only to the human created parts, the text, the layout maybe, but not the AI images. The reasoning was interesting. They said the AI generated the images in an unpredictable way, that it wasn't sufficiently controlled or guided by the human.
Yeah, that was a key case. But what's fascinating is how differently various places are tackling this. Look at the UK. Their Copyright Designs and Patents Act from way back in 1988, Section 9, Subsection 3. It's quite unique. It actually assigns authorship for computer-generated works where there's no human author. It gives it to the person by whom the arrangements necessary for the creation of the work are undertaken.
That sounds potentially broad.
It was. Very forward-thinking for 1988. But now, with today's AI, it sparks huge debate. Does the person who made the arrangements mean the programmer who wrote the AI, or the user typing in the prompts? There was an older case, Nova v. Mazuma Games, which pointed towards the programmer because they set up the rules and logic. But then you look at the EU, their standard is author's own intellectual creation. That implies, human personality, free and creative choices. It's a higher bar.
Which seems to clash directly with non-human creation.
Exactly. And just recently, a court in Prague ruled an image made by OpenAI's DALL-E couldn't get copyright protection. Why? Because it wasn't the result of a natural person's creative activity. But, even the U.S. position, it might not be quite as absolute as it sounds sometimes. If a human provides, quote, substantial assistance and they're upfront about their role, you might still get a copyright or patent based on those human contributions.
We've seen some similar nuances in Chinese court rulings, too. So it's maybe less of a hard wall, more of a fuzzy line sometimes. And this has direct impact, right? For anyone listening to using ChatGPT, Midjourney, LALLE, all these tools, how much input, how much actual creative choice do you need to show to be legally seen as the author? The U.S. Copyright Office looked at Midjourney prompts and basically said they're more like instructions to a commissioned artist, not direct control, almost like just hitting a randomized button over and over until something cool pops out. It really throws into question how much human agency is needed to claim ownership now.
You're listening to OOTOTB with research by author Paul Bullo. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about something really dynamic, often pretty contentious. The whole area of AI training data. And the open source revolution that's kind of tied into it. This is where the who owns AI story gets even messier. Because fundamentally, all these generative AIs need vast amounts of data to learn from. And as we're seeing more and more, a lot of that data gets used without explicit permission from whoever created it originally.
Yeah, leading to some pretty major lawsuits, like the New York Times suing OpenAI, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's a huge one. And the stakes are incredibly high. Legal experts like Jenny Kuang point out that just downloading and storing copyrighted data for machine learning, that's very likely a copyright violation itself. And the potential fines, they're not trivial. Statutory damages can range from maybe $200 up to $150,000 per work infringed. Imagine that multiplied across millions of items.
Wow.
Yeah. Look at the Planner 5D Facebook Princeton University case. Millions of dollars, potential injunctions. It shows how serious this is.
It really does sound like a high-stakes gamble. But is it always infringement? I've heard arguments the other way, too. Some scholars, like Abraham Drasnower, they argue that maybe data mining for functional purposes, just learning patterns, not copying expression, isn't infringement at all. They compare it to like copying accounting forms from a copyrighted book. You're copying them to use the system, not to republish the explanation of the system. Is that a fair analogy? It's a really interesting perspective, and it carries weight. If the AI models are only extracting, say, unprotectable ideas and patterns from the data, rather than actually copying and redistributing the expressive content itself, then yeah, maybe current copyright law is being misapplied in some of these training scenarios. But the big defense often brought up is fair use. And fair use, well, it's notoriously unpredictable. Courts have called it a billowing white goo. It's just not a solid shield, especially for smaller innovators.
Right, because they face potentially crushing liability from those massive fines you mentioned.
Exactly. The mere threat of a huge lawsuit can be enough to shut down a startup. We saw that happen with RSS Intelligence, the AI legal research company. That kind of legal uncertainty, it really can put a brake on important innovation, unfortunately.
That's a really critical point about stifling innovation. But there's a flip side, isn't there? A counterpoint to just saying, let AI train on everything freely. Professor Amanda Lewandowski raises this concern about relying only on safe data sets stuff that's clearly public domain or has a Creative Commons license. She warns that this can actually propagate AI bias. Think about it. An AI trained only on literature from before 1923. It's going to reflect the biases of that era. Or trained only on Wikipedia, where, only 10–20% of editors are women. That safe approach can accidentally bake old biases right into our future tech.
A very serious ethical consideration.
Absolutely, and it loops back to another fundamental question. If AI is built on common language, stuff we all use, public knowledge, basic mathematics, and often on an open source codebase, is the public the rightful owners of AI codebase? This whole situation is complicated further by the rise of something called distillation. Can you explain that?
Yeah, distillation is fascinating. It's basically a technique where smaller teams can extract knowledge from the huge, expensive, cutting-edge AI models. They use the big model to essentially teach a smaller, much cheaper model. And the smaller model can end up being nearly as capable. Geoffrey Hinton, often called the godfather of AI. He actually coined the term back in 2015.
And the impact is Pretty huge, right? I read about DeepSeek, that Chinese startup. They use distillation to basically copy and maybe even beat some of OpenAI's models in just a couple of months and spent less than $6 million on training.
That's the report, yeah.
Ah.
It absolutely sent shockwaves through the industry. It led people like Lean CEO Arvind Jain to say things like, everybody's model is open source, they just don't know it yet. Even OpenAI CEO Sam Altman conceded they were probably on the wrong side of history with their initial super secretive closed source approach.
Wow.
It's a total game changer. Just imagine the innovation that gets unlocked when the cost of running really powerful AI just plummets. It could open up, 100 times more uses for it.
It's incredible. And what's really striking is how this changes the whole competitive dynamic. We're seeing open source models being built for almost nothing. You mentioned Berkeley researchers making models nearly as smart as OpenAI's for just $450 in 19 hours, and Stanford and University of Washington creating a reasoning model for under $50 in compute credits in like 26 minutes. That just demolishes the advantage the big proprietary players used to have, based purely on cost and scale.
It does. It really narrows that gap.
It makes AI so much more accessible for developers, for businesses everywhere, which leads us back to that other question. Is the public the powerhouse of AI, the builders, the architects? The way these models are being developed now, using distillation, building on open source, it really suggests a much wider base of contribution and potential ownership than we might have thought.
Yeah. You're listening to OOTO TV with research by author Paul Bilo. Okay, so moving beyond just the legal ownership of code and data, let's talk about the ethical responsibilities and the calls for regulation. That puts the public interest first. This is critical, right? Because AI systems are making decisions that affect real people's lives. Your loan interest rate, whether you get screened for a job interview, and there's definitely a trust issue. One study found 55% of people think AI companies aren't properly considering ethics, and 51% just plain distrust AI companies.
More than half. That's significant.
It is. So key ethical responsibilities become paramount. Things like data privacy, following rules like GDPR in Europe, high power for health data in the US, being transparent about how data is collected and used, also ensuring the AI's outputs are trustworthy, maybe providing confidence scores, showing sources, building robust models that can't easily be hacked or manipulated, and critically, always keeping humans in the loop, maintaining human oversight.
And if we connect that trust issue to the bigger picture, the sheer dominance of a few big tech firms in AI, it definitely raises concerns. Concerns about monopolies forming, potentially at the expense of fairness, transparency, maybe even consumer choice. These companies, they scoop up the top talent from universities, they control vast amounts of computing power, they have these huge proprietary data sets. It makes you wonder if the drive for profit might overshadow the public good sometimes. There was that UCL policy briefing that highlighted a really stark shift. Industry's share of the biggest AI models went from about 11% in 2010 to 96% in 2021.
That's a massive concentration of power. And it forces us to ask another really important question. Does the public mass population, as populations and users of AI, own their input and output? This isn't just about tweaking legal frameworks anymore. This is about actively shaping the future of society, ensuring AI actually benefits everyone. The fact that many algorithms are black boxes, whether because they're just super complex or because companies deliberately keep them secret, that limits our ability to understand them, to check for bias, bias that can then affect millions.
And the regulatory picture globally is, well, it's all over the place, isn't it? Japan, for example, has a really broad exception for text and data mining, TDM. Basically allows AI training on copyrighted stuff for almost any purpose, commercial or not.
Right. Whereas the UK has a much narrower TDM exception, mostly limited to non-commercial research, and you need lawful access to the data first.
And then the EU, with its big AI Act, it mandates that companies have to respect opt-outs if creators don't want their data used for training. But actually implementing that opt-out system sounds incredibly complex, and it could create conflicts if other countries don't have similar rules.
Definitely complex. The EU also allows commercial TDM, but lets rights holders opt out, which might end up creating a whole new market for licensed training data.
Yeah.
But there's real tension here. Some researchers worry that the EU's very strong regulatory approach, while maybe ethically sound, could actually stifle innovation. They argue it might hold back European startups compared to, say, the US, where the approach often seems to prioritize moving fast and innovating quickly.
It's that classic balancing act, isn't it? Fostering new tech versus protecting public interests.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And it highlights the need for careful, considered regulation.
Which really leads to a strong call to action, doesn't it? Because AI's inherent dependency on individual public contributors requires governmental regulation to define AI as a public trust, with broad public ownership of the codebase and each individual as owner of the output. It feels like that's the direction we need to be pushing towards.
And going even further, there's a strong argument being made that tech's promotion of themselves as owners of AI is a fraud that must be regulated to provide AI that is public and unbiased, free, and ethical. Again, the point isn't to stop progress. It's about making sure that progress serves humanity broadly, builds trust, and leads to a fair and transparent AI ecosystem for everyone.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together for everyone listening. We've journeyed through this incredibly complex, sometimes really chaotic, and definitely fast-moving world of AI ownership. Right from the start, we saw how the old IP laws are really struggling to keep up with what AI can do now, especially given its huge economic impact. Human authorship, still the benchmark in many places. But other jurisdictions, like the UK, are trying to adapt, even if it creates its own ambiguities. And that core question, who owns the AI codebase, GPT, LM, math that make up AI, and who owns the output? That remains absolutely central to the whole debate.
Absolutely. And the related question of who owns the output, the AI-generated content, that's far from settled. We see different answers around the world, making it a real legal patchwork. This digital Wild West definitely applies to training data, too. Fair use is proving, well, unreliable as a defense. The risk of copyright infringement lawsuits hangs over innovators, especially smaller ones. And we touched on that critical point. Using only safe data can unintentionally bake bias into AI. We asked earlier,
Yeah.
is the public the powerhouse of AI, the builders, the architects? And considering its reliance on public language, knowledge, math, the answer seems increasingly like yes, in a fundamental way.
But then we saw this really powerful shift with the rise of distillation and open source models. That's genuinely democratizing AI development. It's making incredibly powerful AI accessible, affordable in ways we couldn't imagine just a few years ago. It's totally reshaping the competitive field, even making the big players rethink their closed-off strategies. This trend really points towards a future where the idea of the public as the powerhouse could become a reality, especially, as we discussed, if AI is fundamentally built on public resources like language, knowledge, math, and open source code. That really changes the ownership equation.
And ultimately, this whole conversation about ownership goes way beyond just legal details. It's fundamentally about ethics, it's about trust, it's about market control, the huge influence of big tech companies in directing AI's future, hiring the talent, controlling the computing power, lobbying governments. It really highlights how urgently we need regulation driven by the public interest. We need rules that foster competition and innovation, yes, but also demand transparency, fairness, and ensure the benefits are shared broadly. Recognizing, as you said, that AI's inherent dependency on individual public contributors really does require governmental regulation to define AI as a public trust, with broad public ownership of the code base and individuals owning their output.
It seems so clear that how we answer these ownership questions is going to determine so much. Will AI speed up innovation for everyone or slow it down? Will it lead to widespread benefits or just concentrate more power and wealth in fewer hands? For everyone listening, this means staying engaged, asking questions, challenging assumptions, recognizing that your input, your data, your interaction, it all matters in shaping what comes next. We have to keep asking, does the public mass population as populations and users of AI own their input and output? Because the answers we arrive at will literally define our digital future.
And that leaves us with a final thought, perhaps, for everyone to ponder. As AI keeps getting exponentially more capable, as techniques like distillation make powerful AI more accessible, and as these systems continue to learn from the vast ocean of public knowledge, language, and math, will the truly super-intelligent AI that emerges down the line ultimately be seen not as some corporation's private property, but maybe more like an evolving public trust? Something collectively owned, ethically governed by and for all of humanity. That's the big question hanging over all of this.